Startup September and the Sustainability Glossary. Before we start today's session, I'd like to invite Kamila to, give us a bit about Sativa Media and what Sativa Media does.
Thank you, Muskan. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of today's session. My name is Camila, and I am the co-founder of Sativa Media. Sativa Media is one of the few platforms in India that focuses on creating awareness and education towards sustainability, the SDGs, and the cannabis industry in India. Last year at Startup September, we had a few sessions about the hemp industry in India and how hemp can pave the way to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This year, we are so happy to continue our partnership with Headstart and bring you a series of 8 online sessions that target different aspects of the sustainability world. And along with these sessions, we're also hosting a women-focused offline event supported by Hemp Street called Women First, which will be on the 24th of September at the Hive here at Bangalore. And here we'll be launching a report on the importance of championing women in order to achieve the SDGs. At the event, we will also have a panel discussion among female leaders on how they and their ventures are impacting women in 5 key areas. For today's session, Sustainability Glossary, we'll have 3 experts, Sahar Mansoor, Hanisha Vaswani, and Dr. Nitin Dumasia, who will dive into what sustainability really is and what it means to be a sustainable business. So with this, I'd like to introduce Muskan. Thank you so much, Muskan, for moderating this session. Over to you.
Thank you, Camilla. Hello, guys. I am Muskan. I lead design at Headstart Network Foundation. Before we dive into the session and Startup September, I wanted to briefly introduce about Headstart. We are India's largest, for those of you who don't know, by the way, we are India's largest and oldest grassroots level startup community, and we strive to enable the enablers of the startup ecosystem in India. And while we are doing that, of course, helping entrepreneurs of India shine has always been our motto, and it's been 15 years since we've been doing that. We've started this new thing called Startup September, started last year, where it's a month-long celebration of the Indian startup ecosystem, and we celebrate all the stakeholders of India startup ecosystem, right from the founders, investors, the government, incubators, accelerators, and in different ways. We have around 75 plus events in store for you this September, with 5 cohort-based courses and so much more. Thank you, Sahar, Hanisha, and Dr. Nitin for joining us today. Before we dive into the session, would love to hear a quick sentence about you and what your venture does.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm Sahar. I'm the founder of Necessities. We're a social business based out of Bangalore, and we've kind of built with the premise that we can create more sustainable products that are designed not to land up in our oceans and landfills. So really, we've been championing kind of sustainable living, plastic-free and zero-waste living with a very holistic lens, thinking about all elements of sustainability in a very holistic manner since 2016. And I'm excited to share a few lessons and a few mistakes that Necessities has made over kind of along the way. And kind of what my understanding of sustainability has come to be over, the past 2 decades or so.
Hanisha, ma'am, if you could go next.
Hi, I'm Hanisha. I'm the founder of a venture capital fund called Majority. We are still setting up, so we are probably one of India's youngest VC funds in that sense. We are looking at investing into impact startups that can, like technology startups that can create impact at scale. So anything, if you're the founder of a startup that uses technology to reach like 1 million plus people, please reach out.
Dr. Nitin, over to you.
Hello everyone, this is Dr. Nitin. I'm president and CEO for a management consulting company called Growlity, INC. We are a US registered company. We have presence in India, Canada, UK, and many more countries. We have team available here. We are into sustainability solutions related consulting services to our clients. So we help companies to improve their greenhouse gas emission, and calculate their carbon footprint. We also make their net zero strategy. So those sort of services we are actually providing all over the world.
Sounds lovely, Dr. Nitin. So, a quick introduction to what we're going to do in this session and what's in store for you. We want to treat this session as a foundation for you to learn, dive deep into the world of sustainability and how startups can impact the world in a more positive manner. We'll have this will be a very theory focused session. We'll have a lot of theories incorporated and discussed, which will obviously make your life easy when you dive deep into sustainability. With that in mind, before we jump into individual terms, I would like to discuss broadly about the two important cornerstones when it comes to sustainability and the discourse surrounding sustainability. One being the Paris Agreement, and the other, of course, being the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So, Dr. Nitin, why don't you walk us through what the Paris Agreement is all about, and how does it impact us in terms of sustainability?
Yeah, thank you. So basically, if we see the entire spectrum of making this world the best place to live and smile, then 30-40 years back, things started moving. It was not started with Paris Agreement. Actually, it was started with Kyoto Agreement, which happened like 10 years before. But the Paris Agreement was one event which gave a lot of clarity about how we should be focused on the climate change part. And that was the event which actually gave entire world and all the diplomats and the ministry of different countries to really think about seriously on the climate change part. So that event has coined few things which we all talk today. Like one was 1.5 degree, 2 degree, 2.5 degree transition. Before that, I don't think people were talking about what was actually the impact which is coming to this Mother Earth. So in all those contexts, Paris Agreement was an event which gave a clear direction for people to think about doing something in this field of climate change. Now, if we have to relate Paris Agreement with the Sustainable Development Goals coined by United Nations, then after like 5-6 years from the Paris Agreement, 17 SDGs were actually established by United Nations. Now, this was again one event in one of the UN summit in New York. This was launched, and during the formal launch, people also got clarity. It is not only about the climate. So if you ask me to compare Paris Agreement and the SDGs, then SDGs are not only climate related part or environment related part. We have to see that what exactly the world is going through, and world is actually going through so many different challenges. So there we talk in SDGs like hunger, like education, gender equality. There are other problems also happening in different countries, different cities. There is a slavery, there is a human rights violation. So it is not only about environment. So that way, SDGs establishment actually gave a very clear-cut identification of the problems happening or challenges being faced by people around the world. So Paris Agreement, yes, it was important, and there were a lot of plus and minus, or there were people who were supporting that, people who were opposing that, and there was a lot of I would say critics around the Paris Agreement. There were countries who adopted it first, then there was a change in government, and it was coming and coming and going, a lot of things. But the moment UN SDGs were introduced and established, all the people have started even thinking or bridging their own future to do something in the space of climate change. So it all started with energy or climate, then it converted into something called as SDGs, and now it is converting something in terms of making your business models more sustainable enough, or doing the ESG part for your business, and a lot of things around this.
That sounds really, you put a very valid point that, the UN SDGs really brought the world together when it comes to, fighting climate change and making the world better. So, Hanisha ma'am, you've done extensive work around the SDGs in the past couple of years, and you have wonderful insights to share with us on what these SDGs are. So, why don't you walk us through your 2 cents on what the UN SDGs are all about?
So sure. See, the UN SDG stands for Sustainable Development Goals. They're again like in the case of the Paris Agreements. The SDGs themselves are a newer version of something that used to exist earlier called the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. So, we are always seeking to progress, right? And so the UN was essentially the convening body that came up with a framework on how do you measure human development all across Earth, not just for nature, but for humans as well. And therefore, the SDGs came in. And if you just Google the SDGs, you will come up with that list of 17. And a vast majority of them, the first 5 or 6, are all related to people. The first one is zero hunger. The second one is zero poverty. There is decent work and economic growth, equality for women, those kind of things. But to my mind, there is the key SDG is SDG 17. SDG 17 essentially says partnerships for the goals. What it means is that pretty much any entity on Earth, individuals, corporations, UN agencies, governments, non-governments, pretty much everybody owns this now. While the UN may have helped to create this framework by which we can measure. So the 17 ones are more like umbrella ones. So for example, I can speak probably a little more in depth on SDG 2, which I've worked on more. So SDG 2.1, for example, goes down into, are we growing more sustainably, etc. 2.2 might go into our agricultural workers. I may be wrong on the specifics, but basically the breakdowns would be like this, that, it's in-depth breakdowns would be every possible angle of that. When we talk about zero hunger, we will look at every possible angle. Are we growing sustainably? Are we promoting the use of a more diverse set of seeds? Are we ensuring decent incomes for agricultural workers? Are we utilizing the land more sustainably? All of that. So various angles become like sort of the internal targets of the SDG. So what you may be working on, maybe one little 2.1.1, but nearly everything is covered. So yeah, I would encourage everyone who's working in this area to look at the SDGs, because often nearly every activity gets covered by 4 or 5 different SDGs also. So if, for example, I'm running a startup that helps women earn better, it could be equality for women, it could be zero poverty, it could be decent work and economic growth. So that's 3 SDGs covered in itself. So it's almost impossible to find any activity that you do that will just fall under one SDG and one SDG alone. So they're very deeply interrelated, and we should appreciate the fact that all our works will sort of impact 3 or 4 areas. But most importantly, SDG 17, partnerships. Pretty much, if you breathe, you are connected to the SDGs, which is not the UN's job alone to deliver on the SDGs. So yeah, please.
Definitely not the UN's job alone. In fact, it's also a business's job, right? And Sahar, she's worked, closely with of course, she's founded Bare Necessities, and she's worked closely on so many ventures that, contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals. So, Sahar, I would love to understand what it means to have a sustainable business. Right, and what amounts to a sustainable business as well. So what are your 2 cents?
Great, thanks so much for that question. I think the old days of kind of evaluating a company based on just its financial health and that Excel spreadsheet is kind of long gone. And I think right now all of us collectively are keeping more companies, people, enterprises more accountable to basically have more environmental, social and economic goals that are all very much congruent to one another, and very much in line with one another. And honestly, I think we need to kind of articulate impact that cannot be expressed on an Excel spreadsheet, that might be more longitudinal in nature. Suppose there is an enterprise working on kind of putting solar panels and thereby kind of reducing accidents due to kerosene, also just reducing kind of air pollution, etc. That's not going to be seen today or tomorrow, right? On something that you can kind of put a specific number to, but it obviously affects the quality of life, perhaps even access to education for those kids who are now studying by virtue of the solar lanterns. And those studies will only take place in a longitudinal nature, right? And that's creating social impact, but also environmental impact. And I think these days of kind of quick returns or kind of quick instant gratification is kind of moving, and we've seen that kind of globally, whether that is companies kind of or universities divesting their donation monies from alumni from fossil fuels into more renewable energy and things like that. So I think for me, the perspective about what a sustainable business is one that is extremely holistic, that is really defining its social, economic, and environmental goals. That's really looking at people, planet, and profit, and aligning goals, making sure that tracking and measuring it, and reporting quite honestly and transparently on these three kind of verticals. And of course, while I've worked at the UN, studied at Cambridge, those are all kind of more academic in nature, but nothing has taught me more than running Bare Necessities, because of obviously trying to balance those three goals. And it's not always easy. And maybe, when the pandemic hit, maybe I prioritized people because that's what I needed at that time. And I needed to protect the jobs of my team. We didn't fire anyone. We upped our health insurance access. And at different times, it's okay for some of the goals to win over the others a little bit. But ultimately, if you're having a lens that is very holistic and you're going to balance these three goals and are aiming and attempting, and that intention is there to really have those three goals in alignment with one another, I think that's the most important.
I mean, definitely. And also being conscious about, what you do, right? And like we discussed before, if you practically breathe, you're part of the UN SDG program. So that brings me to, how conscious investment also plays a huge role in, fulfilling the UN SDGs. And Hanisha ma'am has, of course, you've talked to us about majority. Can you explain to us a little bit more about how these conscious investments help us in the long run, and how ethical investment is probably the way forward towards the future?
I mean, I wish I could give a very roses and whatever rainbows kind of answer, but so on paper, theoretically, ethical investment, conscious investments are allowed to. So as an investment firm, if I'm running a conscious investment firm, on paper, I should be allowed, I am allowed to return a smaller return. So for example, think of a fund. Pretty much your nearest parallel could be a mutual fund, right? You put your money into the fund. The fund puts that money into some vehicle, in this case, startups. And then a few years later, when that startup is doing much better, we get our money back, we pay the money back to our investors. That's how it works. Now, if you get, so it depends on where you're getting the money from. If you get money from, say, for example, governments, who don't exactly require a major sort of return on the investment, as long as so you do have to therefore consciously chase people who are impact minded, as opposed to people who are returns minded. And there are those two very distinct tracks as of the moment. As someone who's running an impact fund, I could go look for funds from either of those sources. But the same also holds for a startup. When a startup is raising money from a VC fund, again, those are questions to both ask explicitly and also to sound out. I mean, the way the person talks, whoever you're dealing with. I mean, often, the PowerPoint and the mission and the vision will talk about, hey, we are all about impact. But the reality is, hey, returns first. So it's almost two tracks at this point of time. It's either impact first or return first. And what Sahar said, I completely agree. We are moving, or at least making a strong enough attempt to move towards a blend of the two. in terms of, say, for example, accounting standards, there are things like, so while balance sheet will have the profit and loss, there is something called a double bottom balance sheet, a triple bottom balance sheet, which will talk about, okay, what are the environmental impacts of your operation, what are the people level impacts, etc. But the second bottom and the third bottom are not still as sort of given as much weightage as they should be. And that's exactly the change that we want to effect at this point of time with this kind of conscious investment. Can we ensure that our teams, everybody that we fund, looks at that second line in the bottom balance sheet, the third bottom line in the balance sheet? Because very literally, there will be no planet left for us to exist if we don't, for the profits, right? And these are not new theories. If you go back to one of the management books written in the 1970s, there's a book called Small is Beautiful. And one of the early lines in one of the early chapters literally says, we are treating capital as, when we look at the Earth's resources, we are treating capital like income. If those of you who studied accounting will understand the difference between the two terms. Capital is usually a one-time large chunk of money, and income is a repeating thing. So, I mean, the Earth, think of the Earth, right? Let's just take petroleum for example. The Earth is like a bottle, it only contains a finite amount of petroleum. But we treat it like it's infinite resources and it'll just keep coming. So, if we are able to differentiate between those in our activities and help our teams do the same, I think that's the aim that we are looking at achieving.
Definitely. And I think it's very important to also communicate that to the investors as well, right? That, I mean, see, now, people like you and me, we understand the importance of, this of sustainable businesses in our everyday life. But let's say a person X just doesn't care. They have the money, they want to invest that money somewhere. How do you communicate that to, how do you communicate the fact that it's such a, like, this startup is going to help the world in a much better manner is really difficult, right? And I think that's where probably an ESG comes in, where you sort of help communicate that in monetary terms to an investor. So Dr. Nitin, you've worked extensively with ESGs, and you recently received your doctorate on the same. So can you tell us a bit more about how ESGs play an important role in explaining your startup's worth as such to your investors?
Yeah, so basically it is right now also it is a struggle for companies to really evaluate their business performances in terms of the outcomes or the expectations for ESG. So for that, what we have done, in fact, there are a lot of tools already available also in the market, and there are global tools which we can refer. SBTI is one of the fundamental tool which can help us gain the insights on what is our current status on the climate change part. But when it comes to ESG, which is not only climate, so for that, wherever we go as consultants or experts to companies, and when any corporation invite us, what we follow a process where we have recently developed a kind of a framework. This framework has like 30 factors, and these factors are divided into different three segments of environmental, social, and governance. Now, let me tell you that what exactly we evaluate in terms of environmental part of ESG. In this area, because this is the largest area for manufacturing companies, the companies into distribution, the companies who are into construction, or let us say an example like steel company or cement company, they have a big impact in terms of the environmental part. So here we measure or evaluate few factors like greenhouse gas emissions coming out of these companies, energy consumptions or energy intensity, chemicals, waste, packaging materials, logistics, supply chain, buildings, their internal buildings, their biodiversity, the water consumption, water recycling, the sustainable sourcing from their vendors, the product stewardship, life cycle assessment, something like this. And then we move to social part of the evaluation of ESG. Social, again, it is very subjective, because different industry has a different site of deploying people to get their work done. So if we talk about IT companies, they have a different framework to in terms of productivity, and manufacturing companies has a different framework. But here again, for the social element, what factors we keep in mind when we evaluate the performance of ESG for any company? We go and see that employment related part, the working condition, the diversity, equality, inclusion, learning and development, privacy and data security, supply chain transparency, their suppliers who are also linked with in terms of employment, health, safety and well-being, community development, CSR, human rights, child labor, forced labor, a lot of things in social part also for corporations, right? Why I'm giving a little bit of deep insights, because there are so many people listening us today, and they might be prospect startups. So we just want to give them the idea that there are a lot of factors we have to play with to make our business model really robust and sustainable enough. Now, coming to the governance part of the ESG evaluation. In this governance part, for startups, they gradually grow their companies, but for companies who are already having, they are listed companies or large companies, they have a board governance, which is important, element of evaluation of governance part, fair and ethical practices, stakeholder engagements, the memberships, the partnerships they have done so far, the supply chain transparency, and the overall vision and mission of the organization to bring those SDGs in practice. So how they actually drill down those KPIs and then review their performance, that is also part of the governance. So that is how we actually go, and our clients invite us to come to their sites and talk to the people, collect data, evaluate the performance. And in fact, we have a scoring system also out of those 30 factors. And recently in April, on this particular methodology or the mechanism, I'm awarded my doctorate for ESG and business sustainability management.
Sounds interesting to say the very least, and also quite like very layered, right? And I think it's very important to dive deep into each of these layers to make sure that your business is as sustainable as possible. And I mean, there are so many, like, even when I was going through the website of Bare Necessities, for example, I just could connect, right, immediately with whatever Dr. Nitin could say regarding, let's say, your social impact when it comes to your employees or stuff like that. So, Sahar, with Bare Necessities, you've had so many applications to the ESGs, and I see you talk intensively about circular economies as well. So can you walk us through how you've incorporated that sort of thesis in all of the layers of ESGs?
Yeah, definitely. So honestly, Bare Necessities was built with the premise that we can do things differently. We don't need to create this much packaging waste. We don't need to create this, crazy plastic footprint and environmental footprint. So our solution is to provide high quality products that are your necessities, things that you need on a daily basis, from the minute you wake up in the morning till perhaps the minute that you go back to sleep. So whether that's bamboo toothbrushes, the first ever bamboo toothbrushes sold in India were from Bare Necessities, to really creative stainless steel tumblers that are completely collapsible. On the go, you can use them for your tea and coffee, thereby kind of diverting any of the single-use plastic or layered cups, right? And we do so by creating green jobs. We have a completely woman-run manufacturing team that handcrafts all of the products. Most of them don't have any formal education. A lot of them, this is their first job. So we really deeply invest in them and upskilling. We all go through kind of the same leadership training and teamly activities, whether you went to, got your MBA in a fancy school in Canada, or whether you have not even finished first grade, it does not matter. We all have the same kind of program. Of course, we might do little language barrier, language translations, etc. But essentially, we're equipping everyone with the same kind of level playing field. And we are really trying to embed circular economy in all that we do. So that means we are sourcing from vendors that we have vetted, kind of do due diligence on. We also give back a lot of the containers to vendors like oils, etc. So they can take it back, and then once they're sending us oils again, they can kind of refill in the same, say, high density plastic bottles, for example. We segregate waste on site. These are just a few initiatives that we do. And then in terms of circular economy, and kind of on a more customer perspective externally, while I just kind of gave you an inward kind of view, externally we are engaging with customers. We have a social media following that's completely organic, where we are spreading information around sustainability, making it very easy for anyone to understand, not like super complicated, they don't know where to start, kind of meeting the consumer where they're at, encouraging them to perhaps give back the jars to us and get a discount thereby, or come over to our Bangalore office and kind of refill. So again, that's one kind of element of circular economy that we've embedded. We also did a pilot. We were the first company to start selling our products in a recyclable shipper that can be used 100 times. So instead of a cardboard box that you get that you then landfill, the idea was to try and incorporate that and see how we can kind of embed circular design even in packaging. So someone comes and kind of picks it up thereafter, and you don't have any waste footprint associated with the product that's just delivered to your doorstep. So we're always trying, and not all are successful, but we're always trying to see how can we reduce that waste footprint? How can we be part of the solution? How can we kind of spend resources that are more energy efficient? And, how can we just make this more holistic? So those are few kind of ways in which we embed circularity. Even our labels are printed on recycled paper, for example. We use only glass jars. We use fully compostable, recyclable, or reusable packaging. And yeah, those are some of the solutions that we've kind of embedded. And I think we've seen a mushrooming of sustainable brands over the past few years, right? And a lot of people ask me like, oh my God, this one's copying you, looks really similar, XYZ. And to an extent, I think it's a bit of a compliment. And more than that, I'm just happy to see that there are more sustainable solutions out there. And that just means that these solutions are becoming more accessible to everyone. And at the end of the day, the mission is for less plastic to be in our oceans and landfills, and more impact to be generated. So in a way, the mission is being solved by virtue of these amazing new companies that are also being part of the solution. So I think it's really kind of an exciting time.
That's lovely. Very, very nicely put. Nice way to compliment your competition. But coming back to the topic, we have a few more words that usually are thrown around, but we don't necessarily know what those mean, right? And one of the words that I recently encountered was net zero. Like, even though I knew on the surface what that meant, I would really like to understand that in detail, right? So Dr. Nitin, can you just give us insights on what that means?
Yeah, it's important to talk on net zero because it has become a buzzword. If we see last 2, 3, 4 years, and there is a lot of greenwashing happening around this world. Now, when we go for the theoretical understanding of net zero, then we have to follow a process to calculate your greenhouse gas emissions. Means any company has energy, any company has fuel, any company has transportation, any company has products and services, or goods or services which are coming to their companies or going from their company to customers. A lot of things are happening, right? So each and every corporation has to first of all calculate their impact, which is going back to the environment, which is in the form of calculating their greenhouse gases, typically called as carbon footprint in our environment. And once we calculate that, then we also have to get it validated through certified agencies. Once we do that, then we have to start working on how we can optimize our greenhouse gases. Now, this is an area where everybody has to play. Like how Sahar was mentioning that what they are working on energy efficiency. There are a lot of things companies or individuals will have to work to actually transform their fossil fuels to renewables, their solar, wind, their natural gas to biogas, biofuels, then their chemicals or anything they are using to convert their product or service and bring it to their customers. They have to have the best way, I would say, sustainable way to get it done. So those are the areas through which we can actually cut down our greenhouse gas emissions or the carbon footprint. Now, once we do that, at the same time, we also have to have a very robust strategy in place for the corporation, that how we are going and where we are going. So when we calculate and when we actually take the base year from which we will start calculating our carbon footprint or greenhouse gas emissions, we have to take that as a vision or a kind of a roadmap by which year we can become net zero. Now, net zero technically is the year when you will make your greenhouse gas neutral or zero in our language, right? Now, there are a lot of greenwashing happening in this area. So let me also tell you some insights that how we can become net zero. You can cut down your emissions by the ways I'm talking, or there are so many other ways. We can explore a lot of things, but there are some unavoidable emissions which we can never reduce by zero. So for those sort of things, we have to actually take new technology for our setup, or we have to transit on a larger way. Apart from that, there are also options available where we can go in the open market and purchase carbon credits. Okay, so these days, even carbon credits market or carbon credits demand, something like these jargons are also creating a lot of greenwashing in our area. So a company who wish to really become neutral or zero in terms of their emissions and want to bring it down to zero, they can do something to reduce it. If they cannot reduce, they can go and purchase carbon credits. When you purchase carbon credits, you cannot become net zero. Let me also give you this thing. You cannot become net zero by purchase carbon credits. You can become zero, and the definition is that you are actually offsetting, you are actually bring it to zero, but you are not net zero, you are still emitting. So that particular year, whether it is calendar year or financial year, is becoming offsetted, not net zero. Now, you will become net zero only if there is nothing happening in your company which is harming the environment. The day you reach to that particular state, maybe after 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years, even India as a country has a target to become net zero by 2070. There are so many people who are creating critics on this target, but that is how our whole large country is all about. So it will take time. You can become absolute net zero. I will again tell this word, absolute net zero, by after few years, because it is a very deep process. So these are the things happening in the area and in the industry, in the marketplace. People are playing with the words like net zero. People are playing with carbon credits, offset, and a lot of greenwashing is happening. But I believe there are so many demonstrations already in the market and business where people are really claiming, or people are really committing themselves by when they will become net zero, and they are actually establishing governing frameworks within their organization which can review their calculations. They do audits, and they talk to the auditors, they talk to their team, bring new technologies, and a lot of things are happening. So yeah, it is all about net zero.
So many questions I have. So first question to you, Dr. Nitin, is what does greenwashing mean, right? Because we've often heard that word, but don't necessarily know what it means. So yeah, would love to understand that first.
See, according to me, greenwashing is something which is not true, but people are claiming, or people are making a lot of noise on that particular thing. Yeah, everybody is evolving. Every business model is being evolved to adopt those new technologies, to transit their traditional or conventional processes to go for renewables, and they are going for organic materials, biodegradable materials. There is There is no one who is standard in this entire planet. So we have to actually go in depth of each and every topic and understand the real relevance of that particular subject. Without understanding, if you claim anything, if you comment anything, according to me, that is pretty awesome.
Lovely. So in the interest of time, I'll ask my other questions later. But moving on, so Hanisha ma'am, when I was going through your your socials and of course your work, I saw you talk a lot about governance and impact, right? So can you give us your 2 cents on that, and help us understand how we can be better as companies in terms of governance?
Sure. So see, kind of building on what Nitin said about greenwashing, to some extent, greenwashing today is possible because the governance piece is weak. So in terms of both tracking impact, reporting it in a standardized way, and being open about like what you mean when you say you're affecting certain aspect. I mean, governance plays a key role, and this is not. So, see, governance can be at 2 or 3 different levels. One is what is compliance related governance, which is like the bare minimum that we all have to do in order to run an organization in whichever country we do so. And in the EU, especially in many geographies, including the EU, there are governance related, like so bare minimum compliances that exist around reporting your environmental impact, etc. India, not as much, and Dr. Nitin can probably clarify more on that one. My knowledge might be a little sketchy. But the point is that the government's requirements will always be something that a vast majority can comply with. The second level of governance usually comes in from more inward-facing sort of teams. So how much can your board keep you held to your vision? How much can the founder hold on to a vision? Self-governance is often, one of the best things. So, for example, let's just take, a completely different example, labor laws, right? In terms of labor laws, the 8-hour work week, the fact that, a certain number of leaves every month have to be given was issued by the Tata Group at Jamshedpur way before it became law by Indian Group. So it's always possible at your end to be more stringent in terms of governing yourself than what your law requires you to. So to some extent, but again, it comes to the point of what is it that you're measuring? So you need to be very aware of what you will measure, where you will track, and make that as transparently visible as possible. So some of the best organizations I've seen are very clear. I'm trying to remember the name of the organization. There's this organization that does consumer goods out of the US, and every page that you visit a website, like you want to buy a tote bag on their website, they'll tell you exactly where it was manufactured, how many miles it needs to travel to go from the manufacturer's location to their warehouse, and then from where it gets shipped to you. So you know your environmental footprint in getting that product. So if, for example, you got a leather tote bag made in Italy, which is then sent to their warehouse in the US, which then comes to you, then they'll ask you to input your location, and you can track the whole thing. And even on the cost side of things, they'll break it down, saying, okay, this is the cost of materials, this is the cost of labor, this is the cost, this is the profit that we are keeping for ourselves consciously, visibly, so that we can continue to exist. So that kind of transparency at every degree of accounting would really help, both consumer-facing, regulator-facing, and for the organization to track itself at the board level. That helps.
Lovely. I cannot stop the session without talking about gender equality and sustainability. That's my personal perspective. So before we sort of jump into the question and answers and get some parting notes from everyone, would love to understand Sahar, your perspective on how we can be gender inclusive and work towards the sustainable development goals, and how all of this adds to the sustainable development goals.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. Honestly, this is something that is very dear to my heart. I, grew up with a single mom. I have two older sisters. I went to an all-girls school. Very early in life, I realized that you got to make it yourself, and you got to kind of make and the most out of it. And when I looked around, I didn't see women in a lot of employment opportunities, especially for a particular socioeconomic class. Like, we often see them cleaning our toilets and our houses. And when I started to create Bare Necessities, I was very, very clear that we wanted to have this backbone of this amazing woman-owned manufacturing team. And we deeply kind of invest in them to kind of really see them grow in their professional career. So I think that's been kind of a cornerstone. And I think even globally, even if you look at the agriculture sector, right? In India alone, I think 75% and upwards of people in India are obviously engaged in the agrarian sector, and women own less than 20% of the land globally, and in India that statistic is down to a 2%. And women globally again are producing 90% of the world's food. And it's just really involved in it. And it's just so shocking because the default ownership in India is to be owned by one person, and it's disproportionately by the men, right? And those are just small ways in which we are excluding women from having a seat at the table, right? And I think we've seen this time and time again. If we invest in women then invest in the community. It's not just about their personal growth, right? They build the community up. They take them all with them. And I think, we've seen that again, time and time again. And I think there is such a significance in really not, and have a kind of weird relationship with the word empower, because who are we to have the power to give someone else the power? But how do we have them, part of this? Because we're 50% of the world's population, and by excluding 50% of the world's population, we're maybe only scratching the surface of our potential. Maybe, our social, environmental, and economic goals could be on a different level if we were more inclusive. And that means, at the Gram Panchayat level, it means at the parliament level, it means at the CEO and boardroom level. We need more representation, and even in investment. I personally definitely experienced this. Again, 2% of VC funding goes to women founders. And I actually read a book in my business class in Los Angeles when I was an undergrad. And I was just so shocked. And this was 10 years ago. And globally, the statistic now is 2.65 or something percent. Maybe if you're generous, give it a 4%, even if you double it. It's unfathomable that globally less than 5% of venture capital money is going to women founders. And I think that enough in itself is a shocking statistic. And you can also see that women tend to kind of have great financial discipline, are very, very cognizant of those impact values, social and environmental values, and not just super cutthroat on that one kind of financial metric. So it's really, really interesting that we've all had anecdotal stories. There's evidence to back it up, whether that's, FPO, which is the world from the United Nations on the land statistic that I mentioned, to kind of more recruited, even if you look at your stories and you look at the statistics, it's backed up by data as well. So I think it's really, really 2022, and we have to change the narrative in a more holistic format, not in a way that's just kind of checking a box to put it on your glossy CSR report. It has to be from within. And that's what I really, really genuinely believe in.
Lovely. Actually, very thought-evoking as well. Would love to, get some,
just one tiny, going one step back. So again, some perspective from feeding people. If you look at literally school feeding programs on the women's side of things, feeding a girl child has a greater ROI than feeding a male child, because apparently there is a positive correlation between the earning capacity of a person and how long their mother went to school. So literally it has a 2 generations sort of benefit to Sarah's point about longitudinal impact. It's pretty much that. So if the mother went to school, finished high school, etc., the child is likely to be healthier, stay in school longer, and have a greater earning capacity and a lifelong sort of earning capacity. So that.
Very interesting. Can you also tell us a little bit about longitudinal impact? Because again, a term would not want to miss it.
Yeah. So I mean, essentially this, right? If you put in the money today, if you put in the CSR money today, certain things will give you a how do you call it, a result pretty much immediately. I mean, okay, if your CSR activity is going to pay for planting a tree, that tree exists at the end of the activity. But in 2 years, that tree is going to give fruits, or whatever, 3 years. Okay, so you pay for those 3 years to plant that tree and keep it along. But in 6 years, 10 years time, that those fruits are going to allow that farmer to send his kids to school, change from a kacha house to a pakka house, allow, each subsequent year of prosperity will add on to, similar to Sahar's example. So Habitat for Humanity, for example, as an NGO, literally says that, they track separately the number of children who went to school because their beneficiaries went from kacha houses to pakka houses. So that kind of thing. And that those have long-term sort of follow-on benefits, right? If you're able to keep a child in school for longer, that child is going to earn better, which in turn is going to improve the economic state of the whole sort of community as a whole. I'll give you an example. Startup that we guided in early 2020, and they started around 2019, late 2019. The first, again, like Bare Necessities, all women producers. The first woman producer that they were able to onboard now this year, like maybe a month ago, was able to buy land of her own. This is not even, I'm not talking about 30 years longitudinal, but a person who never worked outside the home has now earned enough over the span of, say, about 3 years to be able to buy a small agricultural plot of her own. So, and she did this by making handicrafts. So now think about all the follow-ons. But let's not even go into 15 different directions, even if you're able to track one or two, like, the prosperity metric, the healthcare metric. So the moment you have enough food, see, because you start from, especially when you look at the lives impacted kind of metric, you're looking at, okay, what do people need? I mean, it becomes that roti kapda makan kind of thing, right? So you start from, say, for example, a nutrition metric, saying how many people don't have enough money to even feed their kids. And can we do something? Can we do something through our startup or through our work that will allow people to earn better or save more or whatever it is? That's our focus at Majority, for instance. So am I able to fund startups that allow people to earn, say, 15% better? 1 year, 2 years down the line, it will show up in better nutrition for their kids. 5-10 years down the line, it will show up as better living conditions, more disposable income, etc. Because once those basic needs have been met, you're kind of becoming net zero from the opposite angle. You're filling up a need that was there for years, but it was being sort of cobbled through and made. And then you start seeing the positive impacts. They come out of the cycle of poverty because they are not reliant on very, very bad loans from non-banking actors, etc. So you start seeing that. So across the 10-year or longer perspective, you will start seeing more and more benefits in various sort of stripes. But you can stick to one or two and measure that for a long time.
Incredible. Quickly moving on to some questions that are coming in. I think this one is for Sahar. Sufficiently profitable companies can afford to be ethical or sustainable businesses. They only have reputation and social capital to gain. Is it those that are less profitable, struggling profitable or struggling that cannot? How can we reconcile this?
Yeah, I'm taking a minute to process this, but I don't think scale should affect the way you run your business. I think it should just be in your DNA, and you should just kind of build in that discipline. Even with our health, we don't say, oh, we'll eat healthy when we're rich, right? That's not how it is. We're investing in our health from day one because we know that otherwise maybe we won't live that long, right? So it's something that needs to be embedded from the get-go into the DNA of the company. And I think, you shouldn't, and also what is the environmental externality, right? If you are going to package all of your products in plastic, and plastic is kind of never really disintegrates, only breaks into smaller and tinier pieces of microplastic, affects the food chain. We're seeing lots of kind of health impacts due to our lifestyle and our dependency on plastic, right? Plastic found in even breast milk, even in babies, even in poop. I mean, it really has invaded our economies and lifestyles and even our health. So there's so much negative impact on your health, and now you're paying millions perhaps in healthcare bills, right? So the environmental externality, sure, that plastic container that you purchased is just 2 rupees, but then maybe you're paying 2 million in healthcare kind of bills, right? So I wouldn't say that you have to think about it in the future, and it could be at a smaller scale and start from where you are, but it needs to be embedded from day one.
I think more than capital, you need knowledge about all of this. You can go on.
Agreed. And I also think that being sustainable is now just synonymous with being more expensive, and that's definitely not the case. Sometimes, I mean, in my early days of zero waste living and low impact living, I live a low impact lifestyle, and I've been doing this for 5 years. I was very diligent on measuring. Instead of I'm using a menstrual cup instead of sanitary pads. Okay, I'm actually saving 2 lakh rupees in just, in my lifetime, by kind of not investing on a monthly sanitary pads that are just going to pollute the planet. So I was very diligent on measuring these things. And actually, sometimes the right thing to do, or the more sustainable thing to do, or the more impact-driven thing to do is not the more expensive option. And we should be more innovative. And I think there's so much knowledge out there. We have Google at the tip of our fingertips. And we really need to leverage that in order to kind of make educated and informed choices.
Makes sense.
Also take that for a second.
Yeah, definitely.
See, the point is, again, if you look at it as a consumer, and this is a perspective from some of the startups we've been guiding. So, for example, you're right. So if I'm an ethical honey brand and I'm going up toe to toe against Dabur. So, I mean, I've had an ethical honey brand that I advice tell me Dabur is retailing at a rate at which they don't even buy from the farmer. So Dabur is selling at 300 rupees a kg. They're buying from the farmer at 475. There's just no sort of going toe to toe with somebody who is putting ethics next. So you will have to find your audience, grow them. So use community, be smarter in marketing on spelling out why you and why not the cheapest option. Because the cheapest option is very literally painful for the planet. So I mean, it will be a lot of education. It will be a lot of communication. So that's why I often try to say, when you're thinking of, being on a supermarket shelf, change your shelf. Change the shelf that you're on. You may end up appealing to a smaller set of customers who agree with this ethos. And that first small set of customers will help you reach the kind of scale that will allow you again to have this much profit in the bank to then, reach a bigger set. But instead of trying to compete with a Dabur on the price point, change the customers that you're going to. If it means no customers in India and your best customers are in whatever, I don't know, France, so be it. I mean, but the first key of a sustainable business is that you have to live long enough as a business to solve the problem that you. So, as much as we'd like to keep people and planet first, profit must be a requirement because profit exists so that you exist. If you're not around to solve the problem, then the problem is never getting solved. Okay.
True. Which moves, gives us to the next question. Is the technology for net zero even accessible in terms of deployment at scale, cost, etc.? Just like in economic terms, the marginal cost to zero crime is infinite. This sounds inhibitingly expensive. Dr. Nitin, I think this is for you.
Yeah, so it's very... I don't know how they have crafted the question, but I'll try to bring some insights about what actually is the reality. See, net zero is achievable. Net zero is not difficult. And net zero will not take much of your money. Now, I want to link this with some core questions I ask to my clients, like people who want to make money. Okay, they will not think about net zero as their first priority. So we have to be very much clear about a purpose statement to be in the business. Okay, so I just go and ask my clients that first tell me what's the purpose to do this. And when they start talking about, I want to make money, I want to do this, and there is nothing coming out like, I want to solve problems, I want to do something, right? Which is the prime requirement of any business. So when we link our purpose with the overall business model, net zero will become so cheaper for you. Now, in the same question, there is a technology which the person who is asking the question. Now, I will give you one simple example that if I go to UK and if I buy a Nike shoes, in their invoice, they declare their emission details, right? How much carbon was emitted when this shoes, the pair of shoes was manufactured. Now, when you bring those sort of transparency to your end consumers, that actually gives them more confidence to purchase your products. So we have to always see and convert that into an opportunity, how we can reach out to our customers and then convey our story to them, by which we can create our real brand and the purpose we want to be in this whole game, right? And there are technologies. Now let us talk about blockchain. There are a lot of tools and technologies which can actually make us enabled, link our things happening in the business models, and then also that can give some transparencies to our end consumers. So when we see the holistic picture, net zero is not costly. Net zero actually can make a lot of savings for your business.
Lovely. Hanisha ma'am, next question is for you. Could you share some creative startups that you have come across that are profitable and tackling SDG issues?
Yeah, I mean, both. I gave a couple of examples. One is this startup called Sirohi. They look at artisans. So basically, they started off with the point of view of women's empowerment. Then said, okay, what can women do? If they wanted to increase the income of the women in a particular area, what can these women do? So then they built a product list basis the capabilities of those women. And so they currently retail a lot of handicraft-based products, which are home decor, large ticket items for home decor. The other one is called Under the Mango Tree. They do artisanal honeys and they source them ethically from farmers at large scales. But again, I mean, if you ask me, since you asked me for profit and SDG, we could come somewhere. If you ask me for crazy scale and SDG, I don't have an example yet. But the day I do, I will share that. So that's I think the future we have to build.
I'll add soon to be bare necessities, by the way. Crazy scale and SDGs, soon to be bare necessities.
Yeah. Definitely. Beko is another one, same kind of area, working in the same sort of area as you guys. Then there's one called Chakra, which used to initially work on filtering air and using pollution, like the pollutants that are captured in air filters, to build industrial inks. Again, they've pivoted from that to more devices that can help large organizations do it. But that's another good example.
Dr. Nitin, you wanted to add something?
I just wanted to add one line that, see, any startup or any business will have some sort of impact. So it is also becoming difficult to actually gauge what is the level of the impact. So in that context, anybody who is surviving, has a good story to share, and they are like, profitable startup. Then I'll come to my base question. If their purpose was to bring the real impact, then I can tell those startups as profitable SDG linked startups.
Yeah, no, completely to your point. I mean, my most common question from people is, so are you saying like somebody like a Misho is not an impact startup? It is. I mean, especially when they sit there and say, like we've allowed 100,000 women, or what was the number, to become sellers. Great, fantastic. You've allowed them. But the problem is, the moment things go bad, those are the sellers that are first not sort of onboarded. So if you're abandoning, so to Sahar's point about going people first when COVID happened, and you have to, if you're impact focused, you will make that happen. If you're profit focused, then you may not. So that's something to definitely keep in mind.
Any parting notes for our audience? This is for all of you.
Yeah, I think this has almost become my standard parting note. The SDGs especially, they look like this mountain that has to be solved. So it's often easy when you're starting out as a young startup to say, hey, I can't solve hunger. I can't solve world hunger. I can't solve world poverty. All I'm saying is put one foot in front of the other and be a little better today. I mean, progress in some positive direction is better than no progress at all. Just move right now for the moment.
Sahar, if you want to go next.
I think if you are an entrepreneur or thinking about entrepreneurship, especially in the impact space, and you're really, really passionate about a problem that needs to be solved, I think the best time to do it is now. Climate change is real. Whether you live in Bangalore and have experienced it personally over the past few weeks or are watching the news, it is definitely the best time to do something. The time is right now. So just do it and get started.
I mean, at Headstart, we have this war cry for the ecosystem. Time to start up is now. So time to do anything actually is now. Dr. Nitin, your 2 cents.
Yeah, so I'll just say one line that you have to have kind of a frequency on which you can measure the impact. So what happens? People even want to bring a lot of change and impact in the beginning. The moment they start seeing numbers, and then they have their own struggle of employment and scaling, funding, a lot of things happen in first 1,000 days of their business. Then they sometimes forget to actually measure the impact which they really wanted to create. So I want to be practical enough here and to advise everyone that you have to have a frequency. It can be quarterly, monthly, weekly, bi-yearly. You have to have a frequency on which you can measure your impact.
Sounds great. Camilla, if you have something else to share, I think we've had a beautiful session.
Yes, thank you so much. This was an amazing session, and I think that we learned a lot from you. I take a lot of things from this session, but I think that sometimes we think of impact or sustainable businesses as this so nice and beautiful, and we all want to help the world be a greener place and all of that. And there are things that are very real, like Dr. Nitin was saying, like you need to measure your impact. You need to treat this as a business, right? Because you do have to make a profit. You cannot be just like saving everyone's lives and then drowning your business, because like Hanisha said, if you are not here, right, to make that happen or have that solution be available to others, then what's the point? So I do think that the time to start up is now, like Sahar said, like just do it. But this space, the sustainability space, the impact space, is just like any other space in terms of business and how you approach it. It just has this big plus, which is you're actually sowing for a better future, and you're sowing for something that will outlive you if you start out with that clear purpose and those clear foundations for your business. So I'm like, take so many things from these sessions. Thank you so much for being a part of this, and thank you Muskan for moderating as well.
Lovely. I think we've had a great session and a very fruitful one. I certainly have a lot of things to take away from this session. See you audience in our next session, which we will be posting about on our social media. And stay tuned for further updates on HSX, which is going to happen next month. See you guys. Bye.